Chapter 10. The First Lesson. We stayed in the crawl space for 2 hours. I know because Cale had a clock, not a wristband, not a pulse-synced display. A clock, a small mechanical thing he kept in a pouch on his belt. Its face cracked, its hands real metal, turning through their circles by the power of a tiny wound spring. No batteries, no data, just gears and tension, and the patient, analog ticking of a device that measured time without asking the universe's permission. He checked it twice. Both times he angled it toward a faint glow, seeping through the crawlspace walls, bioluminescence from a data vein running through the rock, and squinted at the hands with the focused calm of someone who had spent a lot of hours in very small spaces waiting for very large things to pass. The sweepers moved through the syntax, like weather. You didn't see them. You heard them. The howl, that oscillating electronic frequency that ate sound and replaced it with itself. And you felt them. A pressure change, a drop in temperature so severe that frost bloomed on the cable walls of our crawl space, crystallizing in fractal patterns that looked, in the blue-green light, like circuit diagrams drawn by winter. And beneath the cold, a sensation I can only describe as subtraction. Like the space around you was being simplified, reduced. Each pass of the howl carried fewer echoes than the last, because there was less architecture left to echo off. They were consuming the syntax's structure, eating the tunnels, the junctions, the abandoned server banks in the deep levels. Not looking for us specifically, Cale explained this in a whisper, so quiet I had to read his lips. Sweepers weren't smart, they were thorough. They moved in expanding patterns from the point of incursion, the place where I'd fallen through, and they consumed everything within their radius until the pulse recalled them, or they ran out of energy. Whatever they touched was retroactively unmade, not destroyed, unhappened. The good news, Cale murmured, his breath clouding in the freezing air, is that they're expensive. The pulse can't run them indefinitely. Each sweeper burns more energy than Sector 7 generates in a day, so it's a trade-off. Spend power to find you, or save power to keep the dome running. And the bad news? The bad news is that they just ate about 6% of the lower syntax. Tunnels we've been using for decades, gone. Not collapsed, gone. Like they were never dug. He checked the clock again. The howl's fading. They're pulling back. Another 20 minutes and we can move. 20 minutes? I pressed my back against the crawl space wall and tried to make myself small. The frost was melting now, the temperature creeping back up as the sweeper frequency receded. Water dripped from the cable casings and pooled beneath me, cold and mineral-smelling. People? I said. Did they get any people? Cale was quiet for a beat. We'll find out when we get back. That wasn't a no. Null City survived, mostly. When we emerged from the crawl space and made our way back through the tunnels, some of which now ended abruptly in smooth, featureless walls of compressed nothing, places where passageways had simply ceased existing, the city was waking up. Lights returning, platforms extending, people emerging from their hiding places with the practiced, grim efficiency of a community that had done this before and would do it again. The damage was real but contained. The lower market level had lost a section, 3 stalls in a storage depot gone, their absence marked by a smooth curve of blank rock where the server towers had been. A cable bridge on the east side had been severed, its far end hanging into void. One of the water reclamation tanks in the deep levels was gone entirely, which meant rationing until a new one could be rigged. No people. This time. Last sweep took 2, Cale said as we walked through the mid-level. His voice was matter-of-fact, reporting. A couple. They'd been in the lower tunnels checking a data tap when the howl started. Didn't get to shelter in time. He stopped at a junction and looked at me. They had a kid, 8 years old. She's with the community mothers now. The wet cement was back, heavier than ever. This is because of me, I said. Yes. No comfort, no reassurance. No, it's not your fault, Zero. Just the flat acknowledgement of a fact, delivered by a boy who had learned that soft lies were more dangerous than hard truths. The pulse sent the sweepers, because I'm down here, I continued. If I go back, you can't go back. The breach is sealed. The containment drones are patrolling every known and suspected access point. And even if you could get through, the pulse has you flagged. You wouldn't make it 10 meters into the luster before the deletion wave hit. Cale turned and kept walking. You're here, Silas. That's the reality. And the only way to make your being here worth the cost is to learn what you can do. The de-resolution thing. The de-resolution thing. He glanced back. Which right now you can't control at all. It fires when you're emotional, stressed, scared. And when it fires, it unwrites whatever digital object is closest to you, indiscriminately, uncontrollably, and completely. He paused. In the luster, that meant glitching a kiosk or putting static on a display panel. Down here, in a world made entirely of digital infrastructure, an uncontrolled de-resolution event could take out a wall, a bridge, a water tank, a person. The word hung in the tunnel air between us. I could hurt someone, I said. You could unmake someone. There's a difference. Hurting implies they'd still be there afterward. Cale stopped at a heavy door, a slab of old server casing, hinged with cable and secured with a manual bolt. He pulled it open. So we're going to teach you control, starting now. Beyond the door was a chamber, round, wide, empty, except for a series of objects arranged on the floor in a rough line. A dozen items of varying size and complexity, spaced about 2 meters apart. The first object was a data shard, a small crystalline fragment about the size of my fist, glowing faintly blue. Dead data, compressed, inert. The kind of thing that accumulated in the syntax the way dust accumulated in an attic. Fragments of deleted files compacted over decades into physical form. The last object, at the far end of the line, was a functioning server node. A cube of active hardware, about 1 meter across, its indicator lights blinking, its cooling fans humming, its surface warm with processing heat. A living piece of the syntax's infrastructure, pulled from the network for this exercise. Valuable, irreplaceable. Between them the objects graduated in complexity. A dead cable, a semi-active display panel, a data vine cutting, still bioluminescent. A small chunk of adaptive flooring salvaged from the luster, its surface flickering between settings like a television stuck between channels. The principle is simple, Cale said. He stood at the far end of the chamber, arms crossed, leaning against the wall with the studied casualness of someone who was actually very far from casual. De-resolution unwrites digital objects. It dissolves their code, makes them cease to exist within the simulation's framework. Right now, your ability triggers on emotion, specifically distress, fear, anger, that hot thing you feel. You know about the hot thing? Every null with active abilities describes it the same way. A heat behind the sternum, a pressure, like something inside you is trying to expand past the edges of your body. He nodded. That's the de-resolution field building. In its raw state, it radiates outward from you in all directions and unwrites everything digital within about a 3-meter radius. No targeting, no discrimination. Whatever's closest goes first. How do I control it? By learning to direct it. The field isn't a bomb, it's a beam. It can be focused, narrowed, aimed. But that requires you to stop reacting and start choosing. Instead of letting the emotion trigger the field, you trigger the field deliberately and aim it at a specific target. He gestured at the line of objects. Start with the shard. Small, dead, easy. Unwrite it on purpose. I looked at the data shard. It sat on the floor, glowing its faint blue, utterly unthreatening. A lump of compressed nothing. How hard could it be? I focused on it, stared at it, tried to summon the hot feeling, the pressure in my chest that had cracked the value board and glitched the cafeteria kiosk and torn the composite open on the promenade. Nothing happened. I stared harder, squinted, leaned forward, clenched my fists, gritted my teeth, Thought angry thoughts, thought scared thoughts, thought about the glitch lady dissolving, thought about my mother's sleep pod, thought about Jax Miller's 9.9 and the harmonic chord the Pulse played for high novelty data sources, who produced enough behavioral complexity to keep the machine learning. Nothing. You're trying too hard, Kyle said. That you told me to try. I told you to choose, there's a difference. Right now you're trying to force an emotion, so the emotion will trigger the ability. That's backward. You don't need the emotion. The emotion is just the uncontrolled trigger, the fuse. What you need is the field itself, the de-resolution. It's not made of anger, it's made of you. The anger just happens to shake it loose. So how do I shake it loose without the anger? Cale thought about this, pushed off the wall, walked over to me and stood close enough that I could see the individual scars on his knuckles. Up close, they weren't random. They formed a pattern, small deliberate marks, evenly spaced, like someone had pressed something sharp into his skin at regular intervals, like data points on a graph. When you were standing at the value board, he said, the night before the envelope, the first time the static appeared on your hand, what were you feeling? Angry, frustrated, the usual? No, deeper, under the anger. What was the actual feeling? The one you don't have a word for? I closed my eyes, went back to the promenade, the flatline fountain, the scrolling names, my hand on the cold glass. The anger, yes, the familiar, impotent anger of pressing a button that didn't respond. But underneath it, underneath the anger, underneath the frustration, underneath 15 years of being a dead pixel on a pristine screen. Want, I said. I wanted to exist. There it is, Cale stepped back. De-resolution isn't destruction, Silas. It's not about tearing things apart. It's about asserting reality. Your reality. You're unwriting the code because the code says you don't exist, and some part of you, the deepest part, the part the Pulse couldn't index, disagrees. That's the field. That's the source. Not anger, not fear, refusal. The refusal to be nothing. He pointed at the shard. So don't try to break it. Don't try to destroy it. Just look at it and be. Exist at it. Let the part of you that knows you're real push outward and direct that push at the target. I opened my eyes, looked at the data shard, stopped trying to feel something and just stood there, in the chamber, in the syntax, in the cruel space of the universe. 15 years old, covered in someone else's poncho full of stew that was too salty and alive, real, present. I am here, I thought, not as an affirmation, not as a mantra, as a fact. The same way gravity is a fact, the same way the grey sky is a fact. I am here, and I am not nothing, and no algorithm, and no score, and no system of organised forgetting can make me nothing, because I exist, and existence is not a privilege granted by a machine. The heat came. Not like before, not the sharp reactive flare of distress. This was slower, deeper, a warmth that started in my centre and expanded outward like a sunrise, steady and inevitable. It reached my arms, my hands, my fingertips, and the data shard dissolved. Not violently, not with a crack or a flash. It went the way the glitch lady had gone, softly, gently, pixel by pixel, except this time I was doing it. I could feel the connection between my field and the object, like a thread of warm static running from my chest to the shard. I could feel the shard's code, a simple, compressed structure, barely more complex than a number, and I could feel it coming apart under my attention, simplifying, reducing, unwriting. In 3 seconds it was gone. A faint shimmer of blue light lingered where it had been, then faded. I exhaled. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something else, something that felt, for the first time in my life, like power. Good, Kyle said, quiet, almost gentle. Now the next one. The dead cable went in 5 seconds, the semi-active panel in 8. The data vine cutting took longer. It was alive or close to alive, and its bioluminescent code resisted in a way that the dead objects hadn't. But I held the field steady, directed the push, and watched the vine's glow flicker, stutter, and go dark. 4 objects down. I was sweating. My legs felt watery. Each unwriting took something out of me. Not physical energy exactly, but something adjacent to it. Like I was spending a resource I didn't have a name for. The adaptive flooring next, Cale said. The chunk of luster composite sat on the ground, cycling between settings: warm gold, clinical white, neutral grey, warm gold. A piece of the world I'd grown up on. A fragment of the floor that had never once adjusted to my step. I reached for the field, found it, let the warmth build. But the composite was more complex than the previous objects. Its code wasn't a simple structure. It was layered, dynamic, actively running multiple processes. The adaptive surface was cycling because it was still executing its last command set, stuck in a loop, waiting for a pulse signal that would never come. It was, in a small and pathetic way, still trying, still doing its job, still following orders from a system that had thrown it away. Something shifted. The warmth in my chest flickered, destabilized. The controlled push I'd been directing at the composite scattered. Not outward in all directions, not the unfocused bomb Cale had warned about, but sideways, laterally, toward the only other complex digital object in the chamber. The server node. Silas, Cale started, too late. The D-resolution field hit the functioning server node like a wave hitting a sandcastle. The indicator lights went dark. The cooling fans stopped. The processing heat vanished. And the cube, a meter of active, irreplaceable infrastructure, a piece of the living network that kept Null City's communications and water systems and emergency protocols running, unwrote itself in under 2 seconds. Gone. Completely. Not even a shimmer. The chamber was silent. I stood in the middle of the floor, hands still raised, the field collapsing back into my chest with a sensation like swallowing something too hot. The adaptive flooring chunk sat untouched at my feet, still cycling through its settings. Warm gold, clinical white, neutral grey, warm gold. I turned to Cale. His face was blank. Not angry, not disappointed, just blank. The way a screen looks when the power cuts and the display hasn't decided what to show next. That server node, he said, was connected to the Null City water monitoring system. It was the only one we had. We salvaged it from the deep levels 6 months ago. 4 people almost died retrieving it. It took 3 weeks to integrate into our network. His voice was flat. Reporting. The same tone he'd used to tell me about the couple the sweepers had consumed. Without it, we can't monitor the water reclamation systems remotely, which means someone has to physically check the tanks every 4 hours, in tunnels that the sweepers just reduced by 6%. Cale, I'm sorry, Don't. He held up a hand. The scarred knuckles, the data point pattern. Don't apologize. Apologies don't rebuild server nodes. He closed his eyes, took a breath. When he opened them again, the blankness was gone, replaced by something I hadn't expected. Patience. Tired, threadbare, hanging by its last fibre patience. But patience. You lost control because you empathized with the target, he said. The flooring. You saw it running its loop, following its old orders, and you felt something for it. Compassion. Pity. Whatever. And that emotion disrupted your focus and redirected the field. He looked at the empty space where the server node had been. Your power isn't just fueled by the refusal to be nothing, it's disrupted by the instinct to see something in everything, even in a piece of broken floor. Is that bad? Cale stared at me for a long time. The amber goggles on his forehead caught the chamber's dim light. Behind him, the adaptive flooring cycled on. Warm gold, clinical white, neutral grey. It's the most dangerous thing about you, he said, and probably the only reason any of this is going to work. He turned and walked toward the door. Stopped, looked back. Same time tomorrow. And Silas? The crooked smile. One side only. More tired than before, but real. Next time, I'm putting the expensive equipment in a different room. he left. The door sealed behind him with a heavy, manual clunk. I stood alone in the chamber. The adaptive flooring glowed at my feet. Warm gold, clinical white, neutral grey, running its program, doing its job, waiting for a signal from a world that had forgotten it. I knelt down and pressed my palm against its surface. It was warm, and for the first time in my entire life, the surface shifted beneath my hand. Adjusted. Recognized my pressure, my weight, my temperature, my presence. Not because the pulse told it to, but because the code was still there, still listening, still hoping that someone would step on it and mean it. The display turned a colour I'd never seen it produce. Not gold, not white, not grey, green. A deep bioluminescent green. The colour of the syntax. I pulled my hand away. The green faded. The loop resumed. But I'd seen it. And I thought, as I sat alone in the training chamber, with an empty space where a vital server node used to be, and a broken piece of floor that had just recognised me for the first time, I thought that maybe Kale was wrong about one thing. Maybe seeing something in everything wasn't just dangerous. Maybe it was the whole point.